because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello everybody and welcome to GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. Now, it's a busy news day. It's a moving feast, this show, ladies and gentlemen, so strap yourselves in. Boris Johnson and his allies have launched a legal fight back against a Commons inquiry into the claims that he lied to Parliament about Partygate. Would you have Boris back? GB Views at gbnews.uk. Don't be shy, get in touch. Would you have Boris back? And our pound is in danger as it falls against the dollar to its lowest level in more than 2 years. What is happening to the UK economy? We'll hear from our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, but probably the biggest story of the day so far anyway is what we're going to get stuck into, hopefully live from the scene very shortly, and that is Extinction Rebellion. Yes, that's right, they're at it again. These are obsessed with gluing themselves to things, but this time it's to the Speaker's chair in the House of Commons. That's right, you heard, they've managed to break into the chamber of the House of Commons. Loads of questions there. How on earth did they get in? Of course, not so long ago, PC Keith Palmer was stabbed to death outside. It should be one of the most secure buildings in the UK. How have these people managed to get in there? When will we remove them as well? We're going to hear from our Home Affairs and Security editor, Mark White, who's going to be live from the scene on that as well. But get in touch. I know that's angered a lot of you. And over 1 million cash-strapped households will receive a one-off payment today. But with rising bills soaring, inflation and, of course, even energy rationing is now on the cards. Will this scratch the surface? And, of course, remember, get those emails coming in, gbviews at gbnews.uk. You can, of course, tweet us as well at gbnews. A couple of key points, really, for the show today. As like I said, it's very much going to be rolling news this today as things come in their dribs and drabs. Boris Johnson, would you have him back? Potentially, he could be exonerated over Partygate. Did we jump the gun too soon as voting comes to a close in the Tory leadership race? And, of course, this news that we're going to be sticking with throughout, hopefully live from the scene very shortly. That's right, Extinction Rebellion have got into the House of Commons. We'll bring you the very latest on that. gbviews at gbnews.uk. Let us know what you think about all of this. Of course, it is GB News. I am Patrick Christys. You are watching GB News Live. But first, it's your headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 1. I'm Rhiannon Jones with the headlines from the GB Newsroom. Extinction Rebellion protesters have superglued themselves around the Speaker's chair in the House of Commons. Video shows 3 members of the environmental group holding hands in front of the chair. 2 others are holding banners. Some had booked on an official tour of the building. In total, around 50 protesters are involved. Banners have also been dropped outside from the Palace of Westminster. The group's calling for a citizens' assembly to combat what it describes as corruption in Parliament. Dame Cressida Dick says it's important politicians respect due process and don't break rules. It's after a review found she felt intimidated into stepping down as Met Police Commissioner. An ultimatum issued to Dame Cressida by Sadiq Khan was said to be behind her decision. The inquiry, which was carried out by Sir Thomas Windsor, also found due process wasn't followed. Conservative Assembly members are demanding an apology from the Mayor of London. Sadiq Khan says the review was clearly biased and ignores the facts. The Queen will miss the Highland Games at Braemar gathering in Scotland tomorrow. It's understood the decision's been taken for the comfort of Her Majesty, who's been suffering from mobility problems since last year. The Prince of Wales is still scheduled to attend. Voting in the Tory leadership contest closes at 5 p.m. today, with the results set to be announced on Monday. Either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak will take over from Boris Johnson as Prime Minister after a contest dominated by the cost of living crisis. The British Chambers of Commerce is urging the next Prime Minister to act as the UK economy is set for recession before the end of the year. It says businesses and consumers will continue to face exceptionally high costs, with inflation set to peak at 14% in the fourth quarter of this year. Meanwhile, the industry trade body Energy UK has written a draft letter to the next Prime Minister. In a bid to help struggling firms, it's asking for business rate exemptions and the scrapping of VAT from bills. GB News has been told that Albanian crime gangs are becoming increasingly prominent in the drugs trade in many areas of England. In Suffolk, the Police and Crime Commissioner says he's very concerned about how the trade's fuelling much of the violence on the streets. It comes as the latest GB News poll found 61% of those surveyed believe violent crime is out of control in Britain. Sarah Everard's killer has appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court to face 2 new charges of indecent exposure. Wayne Cousins is serving a whole life sentence for the murder of Sarah, which he committed while working as a Met police officer. The alleged flashing incidents are said to have happened in Dover in 2015 and Deal in 2020. In court, Cousins offered no indication of his plea. He'll now appear at the Old Bailey in October. Argentina's vice president has narrowly avoided being killed after a man pointed a gun at her head and pulled the trigger. Cristina Fernández de Kirchner was threatened outside her home in Buenos Aires yesterday. No shots were fired and she was unharmed. The country's president has confirmed the gun was loaded but failed to fire when triggered. Police said the gunman, identified by local media as a 35-year-old Brazilian man, has been taken into custody. President Biden has warned Republican extremism is a threat to American democracy. The Democrat says Donald Trump and his Make America Great Again agenda will take the country backwards. Top Republican Kevin McCarthy's hit back, saying President Biden should apologize for slandering tens of millions of Americans as fascists. And Bristol Zoo is being shut down due to financial problems caused by the pandemic. The site, which has been open for 186 years, will finally close its doors tomorrow. All of the animals will be moved to a bigger location in South Gloucester called the Wild Place Project. The existing site will be developed into eco-friendly residential housing. This is GB News. More as we get it. Now, though, let's return to GB News Live with Patrick.
Yes, hello everybody. Lots to get stuck into today. Very shortly, hopefully, we're going to be going live to those Extinction Rebellion protests. If you're just joining us there, they are now inside the House of Commons. Huge questions raised there over a security breach, a monumental security breach. But first, the government is set to publish legal advice into the Commons investigation over whether or not Boris Johnson misled Parliament. So this is, of course, over Partygate. Now, the advice from QC Lord Panic, nobody panic anyway, reportedly says that the Privilege Committee investigation is, quote, unfair and fundamentally flawed. So the Privileges Committee will decide if the Prime Minister committed contempt of Parliament, which is obviously a very, very serious accusation. And this was when he told the House there were no lockdown-busting parties in Downing Street. So Lord Panic's legal advice may strongly criticise this process. It cannot stop the inquiry, but our soon-to-be ex-Prime Minister could be suspended from Parliament or even lose his seat if they rule against him. So it would, well, essentially end Boris Johnson's political career, what's left of it anyway. But there's lots for us to pick apart when it comes to this particular story, and here to do it with us is columnist and senior GB News contributor Tim Montgomery and former Labour Party advisor and writer Scarlett Maguire. Thank you very, very much, both of you. Tim, I'll start with you. Talk to me a little bit about this process now that's going on, because essentially, could it mean that Boris was unfairly biffed?
Yeah, and I think this inquiry already, Patrick, is controversial. All of these inquiries that happen in Parliament are controversial, because effectively you have MPs judging other MPs, and we know that MPs are often very political. And the committee that is judging Boris Johnson is chaired by Harriet Harman, former deputy leader of the Labour Party. There is a mixture of different political views on the panel, on the committee, but generally is Boris going to get a fair trial from MPs who've rejected him publicly? And now we have this... Sorry.
No, carry on, Tim, carry on.
And now we have this legal ruling, really, which is quite rightly saying that the committee decision not to look at the intent of how Boris Johnson may have misled Parliament is unfair. Now, if I tell you a lie or tell you an untruth, there is a big difference between me saying that knowingly and actually making a mistake, telling you an untruth without actually, being fully aware of the facts at that time. And the committee's failure to make that distinction is what Lord Pannick has rightly said isn't good enough.
Yeah, well, Scarlett, I'll bring you in now. Thank you very much, of course, former Labour Party advisor and writer Scarlett Maguire. What Lord Pannick seems to be saying, as far as I'm concerned, is that when you're plonked on the spot at things like Prime Minister's Question Time, often grilled by someone who is as well a trained lawyer, lest we not forget, then potentially you might trip up a little bit, and there's a difference between deliberate lying, I suppose, and not necessarily always getting your facts right or being put on the spot, a human error, as it were. Scarlett, your views on that?
Look, this happens quite often for ministers. I mean, not very often with the Prime Minister. And what happens is they find out they made a mistake and then they rectify it afterwards. Boris Johnson didn't do that. Boris Johnson doubled down and went on saying that no rules had been broken. At any time, he could have gone to Parliament and said, even written to Parliament, you don't have to go in person. He could have written to Parliament and said, I made a mistake. I now understand that the rules were being broken. He didn't do that. That was his decision, his choice. Perhaps he still thinks that that's true. But this is how that works. It's not about intent. It's about what you did.
Yeah, OK, all right. I mean, I suppose as well, though, Tim, just to bring you back in now, GBNews senior contributor Tim Montgomery, Boris Johnson wasn't actually particularly heavily fined at all when it came to these parties. So, if you look at it now, I understand what Scarlett's saying there, which is that maybe he could have come clean sooner. But it doesn't appear there was that much for him to come clean about at all, does it?
Well, and that, of course, is his defence. Lots of viewers may not agree with his defence, but he genuinely thought that a lot of the gatherings that took place in Downing Street were within the rules. And, of course, many people protest about that still. It's been a debate that has gone on and on and on in this country. But you're quite right, Patrick. The Metropolitan Police investigated this thoroughly. Sue Gray, the senior independent civil servant, investigated it too. And as you say, the Met Police only made one fine. And that was for the famous, birthday cake gathering. Yeah. And so I disagree with what Scarlett's just said, really. I think Boris Johnson genuinely did, believe that he was within the rules, and the Metropolitan Police, except on one occasion, agree with him.
Scarlett, how do you feel now about the idea that potentially the public would quite like, or certainly Tory voters anyway, I should say, would have probably quite liked Boris Johnson back? There's polling to suggest that they're not particularly enamoured when it comes to either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak, and arguably Boris has never looked better.
Yeah, I think in retrospect that's very easy, and certainly if you're comparing him to Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, there is a problem. Can I take what Tim said?
Please do.
What we're talking about is not whether Boris broke the rules, but whether the rules were broken. Over 100 notices were sent to people. I mean, PCNs, penalty charge notices were sent to people. This wasn't one. This was 100. Boris might have not understood what a party is, which is a problem. But it is certainly true that there were parties going on there, and at no stage did Boris say, I got it wrong.
Scarlett, can I just pick you up on something there? I do take your point, OK? And yes, I understand that logically, to an extent, it may be difficult for people to believe, A, that Boris Johnson doesn't know what a party is. I think anyone who's ever met him knows that Boris Johnson probably does know exactly what a party is. But Labour Party seems to be very keen for sticking up for people like, very busy working single mums who might not always know what their kids are getting up to. And when their kids are getting up to a little bit of mischief, does the single mum always cop it? Boris Johnson was busy running a country during a time of national crisis. Can you really expect him to have known every single thing that was taking place by his quotes-unquote pesky little kids, although in terms of Boris Johnson, that's maybe an unfortunate turn of phrase, downstairs in Downing Street? You know, you can't have it both ways, Scarlett.
No, just hold on. I mean, this has got nothing to do with single mothers.
Well, no, it's the analogy, isn't it? It's the analogy, Scarlett, isn't it? Because hang on a minute, if we can say, well, hang on, look, people are very busy and they can't be in control of everything in their own lives. They don't know everything that's going on in their own homes, for example. Well, we're holding Boris Johnson to an unbelievably unattainable standard, surely.
No. All we're asking is that when he discovered that there were parties, that he said, I got it wrong. He never said that. There were parties. I mean, come on. There were parties on an industrial scale. They were bringing in alcohol in suitcases. I mean, this was like no other place in Britain, as far as we know, during the pandemic. All we're saying is that Boris should have said, yes, there were parties going on. Clearly, he didn't realise, we've seen the photos, he didn't realise that lots of people standing around with alcohol in their hands was a party. There was a problem. I mean, somebody should have told him. He might have been running the country. He did have a lot of advisors. There was, I mean, you know, there was the head of the head of his office who invited people to a party by email. He should have said, I mean, that guy should have said...
a little bit, some would say, a little bit like a very similar incident in Durham that took place that involved some curry and a few beers. And I believe it was a greasy night, it was called, not just because of the curry. But, Tim, I'll bring you back here. Let's just move it on a little bit, OK? So, is there any possible route back for Boris? I read a rather interesting report today in the Times that Boris Johnson might be saving up a little bit of money at some point and potentially running for Prime Minister again in the future. Do you think that ship sailed?
I hope it sailed, because while I disagree with what Scarlett's been saying about Partygate, I think if you look at his record, high taxes, continuing lockdown way too long. You know, we've just been talking about, you know, earlier on in GBNews, talking about the Channel crossings being out of control. You know, his record's a poor one. But I certainly don't rule him, you know, wanting to come back. He's certainly not quashed the speculation about him, you know, being the Prime Minister again. And if Liz Truss hits the scale of problems I think she will when she becomes Prime Minister on Monday, it certainly will be her, I think, and hits a lot of unpopularity, there might be quite a lot of buyer's remorse. But I don't think we should forget his record as Prime Minister. The fact is that he's left Liz Truss an awful legacy, and that's what we should focus on.
OK, Scarlett, I'll give the last word to you, not specifically now on this particular Boris Johnson thing, more of the big picture political stuff, right, which is that Keir Starmer, unless something unbelievable happens, will lead will lead Labour into the next general election, and quite probably Liz Truss. A lot of the British public, certainly up north, near my neck of the woods, find that a remarkably uninspiring choice. This is a damning indictment of where we are in British politics. It's like being asked to choose kind of between which occasional table you'd rather use in your spare room, isn't it?
No, I think Keir Starmer will be... He's a good leader of the Labour Party, and actually I think he'll be a really, really good Prime Minister. And you're absolutely right. When it comes to Liz Truss, who we all think is going to be the next Prime Minister, I mean, Keir is way ahead of her. And I completely agree with Tim. She has got such problems when she gets in. And we haven't even talked about the fact that many in her party, many Tory MPs, will not be happy that she's won. So
well, we've already had a Tory Lib Dem coalition.
I think Keir will be fine.
Yeah, well, OK, all right. Well, you're very much a big red glass half full there, I can see. But no, that's exactly what we wanted. Look, thank you very, very much, both of you. Great to have a debate to start the show, especially on this particular issue. That was, of course, Tim Montgomery there, senior contributor at GB News and a former Labour Party advisor and writer, in case you couldn't tell, Scarlett Maguire. But I want to know from you, OK, just quickly before you go on to what you can see on my screen there, which is the plummeting pound, I want to know from you, do you have seller's remorse when it comes to Boris Johnson? Would you have Boris back? We are going to be talking about the, well, plummeting pound, as you guessed there. We've crashed against the dollar. What does this really mean for our economy? But I can say as well, stay tuned, people, because there is a fast-moving news event taking place right here, and that is that Extinction Rebellion are in the House of Commons. They've glued themselves naturally to the Speaker's chair. They're calling for a People's Assembly. Huge question marks about how they got in. What does this say about the security at what is supposed to be one of the most, if not the most secure room in this particular country? We're hoping to go live to the scene very, very shortly, so stay tuned. But first, it's time for a short break. Don't you dare move.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. Patrick Christie's here, GB News Live. Lots going on throughout the course of this show. Shortly, we are going to be going to just near the House of Commons anyway, where Extinction Rebellion have managed to get in and glue themselves and call for a People's Assembly. We'll be bringing you the very latest on that. Loads of questions coming in. Loads of reaction in the inbox to that as well. GBviews at gbnews.uk. But just before that now, the pound has enjoyed its worst month in 6 years, as the UK, of course, jills. In other words, bonds issued by the government have seen their biggest sell-off in almost 2 decades, as British assets are battered by a gloomy economic outlook and political uncertainty. Sterling registered its sharpest monthly drop against the dollar since 2016, falling by 4.5% in August and weakening by more than 14% this year. And of course, with looming interest rates rises by the Bank of England and the UK heading for a 15-month-long recession at the end of the year, what will it take to save the British economy? Well, a man who knows is our very own Liam Halligan. Liam, thank you very, very much for joining me here. To a layman like me on this issue, it looks like a particularly gloomy picture.
It is a gloomy picture. The pound has fallen against the dollar, in part, Patrick, because the dollar's strengthened a lot. When people get worried about the world, geopolitics, Russia, Ukraine, Chinese cities locking down again with another variant of COVID, that news just coming through, then they put money in the dollar. International institutions, pension funds, insurance companies, big companies, they move their money into a currency that they feel is safe. And the sort of safe haven of last resort is always the dollar. So the dollar's gone up, that means the pound's gone down. The pound has gone down a lot, as you say. It's down 14% this year. Why should we care about that? Now, the usual sort of broadcast news cliche means, if the pound's weak, when you go on holiday, you get less for your money. And of course, that's true, and that's important important to a lot of people, even though the holiday season is over. The really important thing in this context is that when the pound is weak, we pay a lot more money for our imports, and we import a lot of food, and in particular, we import a lot of fuel in this country, and we import the fuel priced in dollars.
Okay.
So this is pushing upward pressure on our energy bills, on our petrol bills, on our food bills, because we are big food importers. That's why you and I talking about dollars and currencies matters to GB News viewers and listeners.
Well, absolutely, especially as we look we're staring down the barrel of this cost of living crisis. We're kind of in amongst it, really, something that could well only get worse as well. And I know a lot of our viewers, as you've rightly said there, Liam, it comes out as one of the top issues for them, frankly, the money in their pockets, doesn't it? Like I said, we are hoping to go very shortly to Mark White, who's, I believe, outside the House of Commons for us. Extinction Rebellion are inside there, as we understand it. They're calling for a People's Assembly. Liam, can we go to Mark White yet? I believe we can we? Is Mark White? Not yet, no? OK, fair enough. We'll go to Mark White very, very shortly then. But yes, I mean, this Extinction Rebellion issue, of course, is going to be, could well hit people hard. How do you think this kind of relates to what people are going through at the minute with the cost of living crisis? Because a lot of people are saying, you know, not now, OK? We don't need any kind of greater big green levies and all this kind of stuff right now at the minute, do we?
You know, Extinction Rebellion, they've got a certain following among the public, but I think a lot of people will feel, really, now, when we've got these massive energy bills? I mean, Liz Truss has, as and when she becomes Prime Minister on Monday, she said she's going to remove those green levies on our electricity bills, which have accounted for between 10 and 15, even 20% of our household electricity bills. And, of course, Patrick, there's no energy price cap on firms. You know, that's what I've been stressing in my On the Money broadcasts for many months now, that a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises, there is no price cap for them. Their fuel bills are going up 3-, 4-, 5-fold, even more. That's why I think the public may have, you know, short shrift for protests and so on.
Well, this is it. When we do eventually go to Smart, we'll be getting the kind of security angle on this, because that is a massive issue, OK? PC Keith Palmer, of course, was slaughtered out there by a paddy not too long ago, right? That is a huge thing about how they've managed to get in and then crucially stay there as well.
Worth saying that the Parliament is risen, so MPs aren't there. We should make that absolutely clear. MPs don't come back to school, if you like, until September the 5th on Monday.
OK, all right, we'll go to that shortly. But just in terms of, obviously, the economic impacts at the minute when it comes to things like the energy crisis, etc., today the voting for the next Tory leader closes, right? The next Prime Minister closes. Who do you think, from what you've heard and seen so far, is better equipped to potentially get us out of this, or at least ease that kind of struggle for lots of people?
Well, I think Liz Truss, as reflected in the polls of Tory voters, she's well ahead, is seen to be a bit more in touch with what ordinary people are thinking. She's talked a lot more about direct help for ordinary people. She's talked a lot more about tax cuts, in particular, not going through with an increase in corporation tax, reversing Rishi Sunak's increase in national insurance, which is income tax in all but name, in my view. So she sort of spent the money, the notional money, to deliver cake now, right? Rishi Sunak's whole shtick has been, I'm really cautious, I'm the one who can add up, I'm the financially sophisticated one. I don't think we should be spending all this money now. We've got to be really, really cautious, because if not, the financial markets will take umbrage. That's why, if, you know, sterling keeps weakening, you mentioned in your intro, gilt rates. What does that mean? The amount of money that the government has to spend when it borrows money, the interest rates the government pays on the debt that it raises to pay for goods and services and welfare benefits and so on. If those rates start going up, if sterling weakens a lot, then Rishi Sunak is going to start looking like the smart one. And that's why I think it's really important that he isn't going to go in Liz Truss's government. He's going to sit on the back benches. And when I was a kid, there were these things called the gnomes of Zurich. What do the investors think? Will they dump sterling? Will they allow our economy to continue? It's a phrase, Patrick, we're going to be hearing a lot more of this autumn and winter.
Well, there you go. You heard it here first, Liam. Thank you very, very much. Now, we've been threatening to go to this for a while, and we actually can now. Mark White, I believe, is outside Parliament for us, because Extinction Rebellion protesters have superglued themselves around the Speaker's chair in the House of Commons. It would be a terrible day to have a fire drill in there, wouldn't it? The video posted on social media shows that 3 members of the environmental group have been holding hands in front of the chair, 2 others holding banners. Mark's here now. Let's get the latest. Mark White, what's going on?
Well, it was about an hour or so ago, 50 protesters from Extinction Rebellion managed to get some of them at least into the Houses of Parliament. I'm just going to step out of the way so we can give you a look at the protesters there. We'll just go up to them. You can see these protesters are outside the main gate of Parliament. Others just over this way are actually, I think they've chained themselves. Yeah, looks like they've used bicycle locks to padlock themselves to the railings just outside the main gate into Parliament at the moment. And as you were showing there from your still images, there are a moving video that's been released by Extinction Rebellion. Another 5 or so of the protesters have managed to get inside to the Commons chamber, where at least a couple of them have superglued themselves to that Speaker's chair area around the Commons chamber, and that will be an operation now that the police are involved to try and remove them from there. They can't just rip their hands off the Speaker's chair. They need to get solvents and alike to try to dissolve the glue and to get these people off. I'm going to try and speak, if I can, to some of the people here. Excuse me, can you tell me why you've decided to come along here today and to protest like this?
Well, I'm here today to protest. I'm here quite often protesting, trying to wake this government up into doing something positive for the nation instead of just constantly causing division between the people, squandering money. There's so much more they could do. I mean, we're in a crisis that could be solved quite quickly with the pay, for instance. Nationalise our utilities and transport. That way you won't have these shareholders having billions and billions of pounds every year. And we, as you can see, the citizens' assemblies is what we're asking for, so that the people make the decisions.
I get you're very passionate about this, and clearly you see a real threat to the planet. But is this the way to go about it, to actually breach security inside Parliament? I know that the Commons Parliament isn't sitting at the moment, but still, it's a security breach. You're taking lots of police officers out of the normal duties that they would be doing to try to protect people in this capital city from a rise in violent crime. And here they are, dozens of officers looking after you people.
And that is one of my points about what you were just saying. The fact is they have over-policed every single action that we do. We are peaceful protesters. We can police ourselves. We're not going
to. Well, you can if you're disrupting. Well, if you're disrupting Westminster.
No, we disrupt now because this is what we're left with after the legislation Priti Patel has put in place. She's basically taken away our right to protest. So what can you do when you don't have a legitimate right to protest? You find other ways.
Yeah, I should just say to the viewers that obviously the sound quality is not great at the moment because this is working off my earpod and trying to get close into you so we can hear what you're saying. But where have you come from? Tell us your name.
I'm from Cambridge, Donald Bell from Cambridge.
And what do you do normally?
This is what I do normally. Since I've retired.
You're a professional activist?
Full-time activist. Not professional, no one pays me. This comes out of my state pension, which is abysmal, by the way. So, yeah, you know, and with the rising costs, everything else, these things can be dealt with. Put a cap on the price that people pay for their fuel, nationalise the fuel, the infrastructure and the transport. That way you're taking away the profits from the shareholders who actually put nothing back into society. This is why we have inflation. The inflation isn't through wage increases. If people had more money, they'd have money to spend, and that would come back into society.
But what do you say to these people that say you're not living in the real world, though? You've got to realise that with the cost of living and the need for energy security.
It's everybody else who needs to wake up. I'm living in the real world. I face the real world all the time. This is why I'm standing here, because I am in the real world. Everybody else needs to wake up, and they need to wake up right now. And everybody needs to come out and moan. You hear them quietly moaning at home. This is where they need to be.
But they're quietly moaning about you, aren't they?
No, they're not moaning about me.
No, they're loudly moaning about you.
No, they're not even loudly. The public have changed their opinion of us, even though...
Have they really?
Yes, they have, really. We are getting more and more support all the time. So, yes, but this is, again, when you have a right-wing media who don't actually tell the truth, and they simply give their opinions instead of reporting on the news.
We're clearly showing you here today.
Yes, you're here
This
now.
is live.
Yeah.
You've had your say, so
yeah, exactly.
You know, this
hopefully everybody
constant retort
come and join
that
us.
you're
We'll
not
be in
allowed
Hyde
to.
Park on the 10th. Come and join us. There'll be lots of outreach, there'll be lots of fun, games, music. Come and have your T-shirts printed and come and join us. Let this government know that their days are over.
So there, you see, you get your say live on television. So thank you very much. So, yeah, I mean, we hear this from protesters all the time, but of course, the media are not completely and truly representing them. But, you know, it's live on television. He said what he wanted to say. I just want to give you a shot just now, Patrick.
Okay.
Through the railings here, you can see another of the banners that is up on some scaffolding through there. That basically scaffolding was up around the buildings, and quite how he managed to get up onto the scaffolding, I don't know, and that will be an issue of concern. Patrick.
Yes, Mark, sorry, it's difficult. I know it's difficult for you to hear me where you are. You're doing a cracking job. Would you mind, if it's possible, Mark, would you mind just asking a police officer, I believe there's a couple there, how they managed to get in? Because that's a big question. It's in our inbox at the minute, gbviews at gbnews.uk. How on earth these people managed to go and erect a banner like they did there? I don't know if the police might talk to you. Would you mind just asking one of them for me?
No, I'm not going to do that, Patrick.
Okay.
We never go and speak to an ordinary police officer on duty manning a cordon like this. That's not their job to try and give me that kind of information. They're just here guarding this cordon here. It's not their senior officers that will provide statements. That's a protocol. Gets them in all kinds of trouble if I put them in that invidious position of trying to answer a question for us. So as much as I'd like to get these answers for you, I mean, I can tell you some of what we understand has happened as Tom, my producer, continues to get some shots of the protesters here for you. What we understand is that there are 50 of the Extinction Rebellion activists who are involved in this protest. Some managed to get in as part of the official tour that goes round Parliament. That's open to the public. You know, every day you can be part of that tour. And at some point they broke away from that tour and got into the Commons chamber. You know, I can imagine, I wasn't there, but these things are going to be pretty quick in terms of the, you know, from the moment the protesters sort of decide to run off from the main body of the group to then try and get into the chamber proper. There's also some other protesters that are inside.
Oh, okay. Well, I think Mark was about to wrap up anyway there. That was, of course, Mark White doing a sterling job for us live at the scene there from outside Westminster. It's all go, OK? If you are just joining us, you can see, if you're watching us on your TV or online there, the big strap, Extinction Rebellion. The protesters have superglued themselves to the Commons chair. Some of them we could see earlier on as well have got chains kind of around their neck, kind of bicycle locks, really, just outside the House of Commons as well. Big protest. They're calling for a People's Assembly. They're saying that it's time, obviously urgently, as far as they're concerned, to act on the environment. Massive question marks, as Mark White was talking about how they managed to get in there. It does look as though they're in for the long haul, doesn't it? So, yes, we'll have to wait and see how this pans out. You can guarantee, of course, right here at GB News, we're going to be going to this throughout the show here on GB News Live. We're going to be bringing you the rolling updates as this particular saga escalates. How do you feel about this, GB Views at gbnews.uk? You are, of course, watching and listening to us. You can see us online as well. We've got loads more coming your way. We're going to stick with this breaking throughout the show, as I've said, but as well, on top of that, there's other news. They're not the only show in town, ironically. Soaring energy prices are a major concern for households and businesses across the country. So do we need to ration energy? We'll find out next. But first, let's take a look at these news headlines.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. Now, of course, we are going to be lobbing it over to the House of Commons throughout the show, where Extinction Rebellion have managed to glue themselves to some stuff both inside and out. But before that, soaring energy bills are certainly looming over households and businesses, especially with winter heading our way. Rumours of energy rationing have started to float around, with the likes of Michael Gove urging the idea to be considered this winter. He's usually full of energy. But Tory leadership hopeful Liz Truss has rejected the suggestion. So is rationing a viable option in the UK? And how else can we solve the energy crisis? Joining me in the studio right now is Catherine McBride, economist and fellow at the Centre for Brexit Policy. Thank you very much. You've picked a cracking day for it, with everything kicking off in Parliament and all this. Let's start with the rationing idea, if that's OK.
Yeah.
Now, this seems like a very abhorrent idea to a lot of people, this idea that anything, frankly, might be rationed. Is it a goer? Is it necessary?
No, I think that there are things the government can do. Rationing, the whole pricing mechanism causes rationing. So as prices go up, people use less, and there's more incentive for people who can produce more to produce more. And so we don't need to enforce rationing beyond that. I think the prices are going to be so sky high this winter, people will ration themselves. I already know lots of people...
Well, we're not idiots, are we?
No, we're not idiots. And also, we could do things that they're doing in Europe, such as public buildings are turning their lights off at night. Because like us, they used to light up all the public buildings at night. If you go through the city, you'll see office blocks are completely alight at night, often because the cleaners are there, but the cleaners do one floor at a time and the whole building is alight. So there's lots of ways that people will ration themselves and start going, this is a bit silly, why are we turning all our lights on at night? When we don't need to.
What you seem to be proposing there is a radical notion that the British public uses its common sense. And we can't have that, clearly, because we're incapable of doing that, apparently, depending on who you listen to. But let's just say some form of rationing just come in. What practically would that look like? I mean, what could they actually do? Just all the lights go off at 7 p.m. or something? I mean...
Well, unfortunately, I have been in South Africa during brownouts, as they call them, and sections of Cape Town were being turned off at various times, which does interrupt a lot of businesses. It interrupts, obviously, people's households.
TV channels, one would imagine.
TV channels, all sorts of communication devices, which is not good for businesses. It's not good for anything to have a period where they're given notice. They know that their electricity will be off for certain times. But if you're staying in a hotel that's multi-storey and the lift doesn't work, that's quite worrying when you get back to your hotel room and you can't plug in your phone or use the Wi-Fi or do anything like that. That's what life would be like if they started rationing. But I think that what would be much better, right now, luckily, the gas price, both in Europe and in the UK, which spiked massively last week, has come back to where it was 2-3 weeks ago, which is still high on the year before, but it's much lower than it was, unfortunately, when they were setting our latest pricing cap. So that's really good news. And one of the reasons that's happened is because the European storage is now full. They've got as much as they can store for 2 months of the winter. That'll get them through. The UK is hopefully going to open their storage. I think the UK must start fracking because that's the quickest way to get more gas into the market. They've also talked about, Liz Truss has talked about opening North Sea gas wells, which is also good, but that will have a slower lead time.
Yeah, exactly. And I just want to interrupt you there because you've hit on a really key point, especially in relation to the breaking news which we're going through throughout the show here, which is that Extinction Rebellion they've now glued themselves to the Speaker's chair and they're outside the House of Commons and they're kicking off. They want a People's Assembly. Of course, they want their big green agenda writ large over the UK. You've just mentioned some buzzwords there, like oil and fracking. Do you think that they're deluded, that lot there, who are in the House of Commons at the minute? Would we inevitably get much, much poorer to the point where essentially we'd all be lying on beds of moss?
We have put our whole economy into the hands of Mother Nature. It sounded like a good idea on paper, but unfortunately, the wind isn't blowing at the moment.
No.
The good news is the wind will start blowing in the winter. It usually does, at any rate. But right now, today, we are getting 60% of our electricity is coming from gas and fossil fuels. Now, Extinction Rebellion can glue themselves
to what they like.
To whatever they like, but they are not going to make the wind blow. Unless they all want to go to Scotland and start blowing at the windmills, this is not going to change anything. Solar today is 9%, wind is 12%. So without gas, we've got no lights in the studio.
They were speaking about nationalising our energy supply. Would that have any impact whatsoever?
Yeah, because we've got the most amazing government and they run everything really well. I mean, are you kidding?
So that's your main argument against it, which is that basically nationalising things would work if we had some competent leadership.
Well, how many politicians have you met who are knowledgeable about running a company, have experience in running a company, know anything about oil and gas, know anything about electricity production? I mean, most of them have done sort of PPE or history or ancient Greek or whatever. They know a lot about a lot of things, but not about running companies. You know, we have to get the best companies to run this. And that is not our policy.
Well, you're saying something that I've been saying for a while. I mean, Michael Gove, when he was Environment Secretary, just put a green tie on. That's all I could see that he really did there. And now when you have people that seem to chop and change their jobs left, right and centre in politics, don't you, where, you know, they go, OK, so-and-so's Education Secretary or our Health Minister. Yeah. Well, what qualifies them for that? You know, maybe we should be looking for industry-led people, but stay right where you are because you're a lady in demand on this particular show today, may I say, because today as well, over 1 million cash-strapped households will receive a £326 boost to help with these rising cost of living issues, provided for people receiving tax credits. This is the first instalment of a total £650 payout. So the second of which will come next Wednesday. So I'm just going to recap that so you've got all the figures there for you at hand. Cash-strapped households, 1 million of them, just over 1 million of them actually, are going to receive that £326 payment to help them with that rising cost of living. This is for people on tax credits. This is the first instalment of a total of 650 quid, the second of which next Wednesday. So those are the facts, those are the numbers. But with food prices and energy bills rising monthly, will this actually even scratch the surface? And I think it's something that you might not hear on other news outlets as well. Of course, the people right at the lower end of the spectrum there need a helping hand. But then what about the people who are just about in the middle as well? People who potentially on paper might be classed as not in particular poverty. Do they actually bring home a lot more money than some of these people who are going to get these boosts? So actually, you might be sitting there and people might think you're comfortably middle class. Well, actually, hang on a minute. Are you going to be hit by this as well? Joining me to discuss this issue is Greg Marsh from Nows, which is a service providing personalised cost of living forecasts for households, and of course economist Catherine Bride has not gone anywhere. She's still with me. I might as well start with you, I think, Greg. Thank you very much for joining us. So this 350 odd quid payment, is this going to scratch the surface for people?
It'll scratch the surface, but it won't dent it much. These payments were agreed, they were communicated, if you remember, back in May. In May, we were expecting, consensus forecasts were anticipating very significant increases in energy bills. And these payments at the time, I, among others, said on this program, that will help, but it will only help a bit. Since May, and Catherine has said that it's got slightly better in the last 2 weeks. Let's not kid ourselves. consensus forecasts are still now anticipating that by April next year, the average UK household will be paying £6,000 for its energy. That's 6 times more than they were this time last year. So although these payments will help a bit, they won't really go more than a little bit of the way, even for those lower income households, particularly for those lower income households who have larger households, who have more people in the household, or who have older housing stock with less high quality insulation. I think it is effectively inevitable that no matter what we hear from the candidates for the leadership, that there will be an emergency budget. I think it's inevitable that there will be more support announced. And I also think, and this goes to the heart of what you were just saying, Patrick, that even with that additional support, the stuff that's already been announced and is being paid today and next week, and that additional emergency budgetary support that I anticipate we'll be hearing about in the next few weeks from the new Prime Minister, notwithstanding all of that, I still think it is going to be a brutal winter for households, and not just those on the lowest incomes, also those on medium incomes as well.
Well, this is it, right? So I suspect that mass non-payment may well be a thing, and I don't think that's going to be something for a lot of people out of just a point of protest. I cannot see, for the life of me, how some people are literally just going to be able to pay their bills, right? I cannot see that. And Greg, just before I bring Catherine back in here, Greg, if that happens, what happens to these energy companies? Does the government then have to step in and pay people's bills entirely for them? We haven't got enough places in prison to put a load of people who see their bills suddenly go through to $6,000. If I had kids and it was a choice between heating or eating, that's not a choice. The kids eat.
Yeah, and this is where economics becomes politics. At the moment, we're talking about forecasts and we're talking about hypotheticals. This is not hypothetical. If you literally can't feed the prepayment meter and you're shivering, and there are vulnerable people or elderly people who are at risk of serious injury or death if the house isn't heated properly. So these are not theoretical problems. The new leader has about 12 weeks, and not much longer than that, to put something serious in place to avert a humanitarian crisis. That's the thing I'm worried about most. As you rightly say, there's also the risk of an economic crisis if people systematically refuse or are unable to pay their bills. There is already a rough estimate, about £150 per household in the UK, of costs associated with the existing energy company bankruptcies, mass non-payment or mass incapability to pay, would, as you rightly say, see additional costs passed on to other households who can afford to pay. So none of this feels like it's fair or equitable. It feels very arbitrary. Our advice is to households who can save, and not all households are able to save at the moment, but to those households who can save, our advice at NOUS is start saving today. Do not put this problem off. Do not assume that non-payment will be a panacea. Start putting money aside. Use the online tools. You can use nous.co. You can use the other free online tools to make a plan, make a budget, and start to squirrel away for what will otherwise be a truly awful winter of discontent.
Yeah, look, thank you very, very much. It's been great to have you on. Greg Marsh there from NOUS. Catherine is still with me. Catherine McBride there, economist, of course. Do you want to just react to a little bit of what Greg had to say there? I mean, how bleak a winter is it going to be for people? The argument could be, right, we're slating the government a bit for not preparing more for this kind of thing. Should people have prepared a bit more for this, you know? Should we have been saving up for longer?
Well, yes, people should probably be saving all the time for unexpected stuff. It happens. But I think also that we've grown accustomed to living with heating that our parents and grandparents' generations didn't live with. So I watched news shows interview little old ladies who are just going to turn the heating off, where I have a teenage daughter who walks around in a T-shirt in the middle of winter because she's used to that level of heating. So I think we can all start turning our heating down, but Greg is absolutely right. And I think the thing the government can do and should do immediately is cut VAT on fuel for both households and businesses, because the businesses are just passing it on in prices. So that's causing inflation. And households, that's a sort of stroke of the pen, easy to do. And I would be tempted. I'm not sure how you get cut off if you pay the gas bill and strike out the VAT.
Yes.
and don't pay the VAT bill, I can't imagine they can cut you off because you've paid the gas. But add a note saying, by the way, I'm not paying VAT on this, because what has the government done to deserve to add a tax onto money that most people have paid tax on their income?
Gosh.
And then you go and pay tax on spending your income.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've got civil disobedience taking place inside and outside the House of Commons at the minute. We'll be returning to that in just a few minutes for you, by the way, so stay tuned for that. If you are just joining us, it is that Extinction Rebellion have managed to get into the House of Commons. So civil disobedience there, potential civil disobedience, or frankly just an inability to pay bills right across the United Kingdom as winter comes. Or, as the wonderful Catherine was saying there for us, Catherine McBride, of course, an economist, Maybe people should just not pay the VAT and hope they don't get cut off. But there we go. Lots of you have been emailing in today, and I really want to go to those. We are, of course, the People's Channel. Loads of you emailing in on Extinction Rebellion. Mark has been in touch. Mark says Extinction Rebellion and other such anti-democratic groups should stand for election and see how little support they get for their extreme views. Appeasing these net zero lunatics is the reason why we have the current energy crisis. We need more nuclear, fracking, coal mining and North Sea oil and gas. What you've just done there, Mark, is essentially play bingo, word bingo, with all of the things that Extinction Rebellion hate. He's got nuclear, he's got fracking, he's got coal mining, he's got oil, he's got gas. Goodness gracious me. Gordon's been on. Gordon says, at least it keeps the activists off the roads. Yes, very interesting, Gordon. I was covering a story yesterday which was about Liz Truss potentially upping the speed limit on our national motorways. Be interested to see how many of Insulate Britain, or indeed, as I call them, Insulate Prison, would sit on a motorway with no speed limit. I think that might be a red mist job. But on Boris's legacy, so this is back down to what we were talking about at the start of the show. Boris Johnson, could he be cleared now over Partygate? Exonerated, maybe, is a better word, over Partygate. Would you have Boris Johnson back? Neil's been on. In answer to your question, would I want Boris Johnson back? Cheers, Neil. Absolutely not. He had an 80-seat majority and could have done so much, but wasted it. That's interesting, that, Neil. Look, I take your point. I think a lot of people were hoping he'd do more, but then a lot of people email in as well and say, hang on a minute, he had the coronavirus crisis, he had the war in Ukraine. Did he get some big calls on that right? Did he not? We've got a fellow Patrick who's been on. Cracking name, Patrick. Good stuff. I really wish the Conservative Party hadn't inflicted this injury on itself. So I suspect the opposite point, really, to what Neil was making. Why, oh, why would they bring about this turmoil when we need stability? Boris may not have been perfect, but my God, this is unfathomable. We'll never win the next general election. Clearly a Tory vote there. I can't believe I'm saying this, as I fear Starmer will win. England will be severely punished if that was the case. You open up a massive can of worms there, Patrick, and rightly so, because this is how deep-run this issue is. Keir Starmer potentially could win by default. I've not seen a huge amount of policies come out of that particular chap's mouth. Has he just sat on his hands long enough so that the Tory party, in his mind, maybe render themselves unelectable? Is that a good enough reason for winning a general election by default? Would that, though, be the fault of the Conservative Party? And, of course, at the end of the day as well, how do you really feel about all of this now? Is this an act of national self-harm? At the time when we were kind of emerging from the coronavirus crisis, hurtling headlong into a cost of living crisis, of course, got things like violent crime rampaging. It doesn't look like Vladimir Putin is going to stop anytime soon. Did we in this country, and was the media to blame for it as well, destabilise ourselves politically right at the moment in time when we needed it least? Your views, as always, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Loads still to come. We are going to go back to the House of Commons, where the big news at the minute today, anyway, is that Extinction Rebellion, if you're just joining us, have managed to break in to the House of Commons, glue themselves to the Speaker's chair. They're calling for a People's Assembly. I think we need to really drill down into what they mean by this, OK? What exactly do they mean by a People's Assembly? We're going to get stuck into that. Mark White is on hand for us at the scene. Question marks as to how they got in as well. You can see there below me, if you're watching us on the television, the Tory leadership race latest as well. The voting closes. Will it be Truss? Will it be Rishi? And what will it mean either way round? You're watching and listening to us on GB News. This is, of course, GB News Live, and we're going to be going to you and your views as well. We'll be discussing all of that and much, much more your way very, very shortly. Don't you dare move.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, welcome back everybody to GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys, and coming up this hour, well, the Tory leadership contest is finally coming to a close, but the winner faces an uphill battle, don't they? So how will our new Prime Minister deal with things like the cost of living crisis and myriad other problems facing this country, law and order being one of them? On that note, Extinction Rebellion are back at it, that's right, and this time they've targeted our Parliament. Protesters have superglued themselves to the Speaker's chair in the House of Commons, padlocked their necks to the railings outside. We'll hear from our Home Affairs and Security Editor Mark White, who's very much live on the scene for it. We're bringing you the reaction to that. He's been interviewing protesters, and we'll give you the latest as it develops. Of course, big questions as well. Big questions as to how such a massive security breach could take place. As far as we're aware, as far as we understand it at the minute, it looks as though some of them might have got in using a public tour, OK, which is clearly a loophole there. I'll bring you the latest on that more as we know it. And NASA are set to make a second attempt to launch their next generation moon rocket. We'll speak to a space cadet expert, about that. And remember as well, you can email in gbviews at gbnews.uk. Those views are flooding in. Tory leadership race, would you have Boris back over a choice of Truss and Sunak? What are the big issues for you when it comes to cost of living? And what do you think about Extinction Rebellion breaking in to our seat of power? Not just breaking into it, gluing themselves to it as well. You can tweet us at GB News. What do you think about our various topics today? That's right, it is GB News Live. I am Patrick Christys. You are watching us and indeed listening to us as well on your digital radio. But first, it's time for your latest headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 2 minutes past 2. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. An Extinction Rebellion protest is taking place at the House of Commons, with some supergluing themselves around the Speaker's chair. Around 50 people are involved in total, draping banners from the Palace of Westminster and padlocking their necks to the railings outside. 3 members of the environmental group glued their hands together inside the House after joining an official tour of the building. The group's calling for a citizens' assembly to combat what it describes as corruption in Parliament. One of the protesters told GB News they're taking action now because the government isn't.
We're in a crisis that could be solved quite quickly with the pay, for instance. Nationalise our utilities and transport. That way you won't have these shareholders having billions and billions of pounds every year. And we're, as you can see, the citizens' assemblies are what we're asking for, so that the people make the decisions.
Dame Cressida Dick says it's important politicians don't break rules. That's after a review found she felt intimidated into stepping down as Met Police Commissioner. An ultimatum was said to be behind her decision issued to Dame Cressida by Sadiq Khan. The inquiry, which was carried out by Sir Thomas Windsor, also found due process wasn't followed. Conservative Assembly members are demanding an apology from the Mayor of London. Sadiq Khan says the review was clearly biased and ignores the facts. The parliamentary inquiry into whether Boris Johnson misled Parliament over Partygate is unfair and fundamentally flawed. That's according to a top barrister. Lord Pannick was tasked by the government to provide a legal opinion on the inquiry's investigation. In his report, he found the handling of the inquiry would be unlawful if taken to the courts. However, the chairman of the Parliamentary Standards Committee says the legal advice was misjudged. The Queen will miss the Highland Games Braemar gathering in Scotland tomorrow. It's understood the decision's been taken for the comfort of Her Majesty, who's been suffering from mobility problems since last year. The Prince of Wales is still scheduled to attend. Voting in the Tory leadership contest closes at 5 p.m. today, with the results set to be announced on Monday. Either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak will take over from Boris Johnson as Prime Minister after a contest dominated by the cost of living crisis. The British Chambers of Commerce is urging the next Prime Minister to act as the UK economy is expected to plunge into recession before the end of the year. It says businesses and consumers will continue to face exceptionally high costs, with inflation set to peak at 14% in the fourth quarter of this year. Meanwhile, the industry trade body Energy UK has written a draft letter to the next Prime Minister. In a bid to help struggling firms, it's asking for business rate exemptions and the scrapping of VAT from bills. GB News has been told that Albanian crime gangs are becoming increasingly prominent in the drugs trade in many areas of England. In Suffolk, the Police and Crime Commissioner says he's very concerned about how the trade's fuelling much of the violence on the streets. It comes as the latest GB News poll found 61% of those surveyed believe violent crime is out of control in Britain. Argentina's vice president has narrowly avoided being killed after a man pointed a gun at her head and pulled the trigger. Cristina Fernández de Kirchner was threatened outside her home in Buenos Aires yesterday. No shots were fired and she was unharmed. The country's president has confirmed the gun was loaded but failed to fire when triggered. Police said the gunman, identified by local media as a 35-year-old Brazilian man, has been taken into custody. And Bristol Zoo is being shut down due to financial problems caused by the pandemic. The site, which has been open for 186 years, will finally close its doors tomorrow. All of the animals will be moved to a bigger location in South Gloucester called the Wild Place Project. The existing site will be developed into eco-friendly residential housing. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to GB News Live with Patrick.
Yeah, welcome back, everybody. Let's get stuck straight in because there is that breaking news taking place about Extinction Rebellion. Protesters have superglued themselves around the Speaker's chair inside the House of Commons. The group has also dropped banners across the Palace of Westminster, calling for a citizens' assembly. I was doing a bit of research just during your little news break there about what a citizens' assembly actually is. Essentially, it would mean members of the public chosen at random according to age, ethnicity, demographics, basically, of the UK. They would then be made to listen to people who were so-called experts on the climate emergency and people affected by the climate. Non-governmental organisations would then give them more advice, but of course, to shore it up and make sure it's not subject to tyranny, there would be, just quotes, independent people overseeing that. Does seem like a little bit of a strange setup. One protester has also used a bicycle lock to chain himself by his neck to the Palace of Westminster. Mark White is on the scene for us. We can throw it to him right now. Mark is there. Yes, Mark, what's the latest, please?
Well, actually, the police have been making good progress in getting the protesters removed from outside the Houses of Parliament. I'm just going to get out of the way, let you see the shots, far more interesting than me. You can see the police officers here. There's a group have disappeared down the street here. These officers still around here. there were a group of protesters who were just outside the main gate. This is the main vehicle entrance into Parliament, at this side of Parliament anyway. They were padlocked, essentially using bicycle locks to the main gates here. We're here for a couple of hours really, but the police have now got the heavy-duty bolt cutters that they required, the specialist team actually that they have now, the Metropolitan Police, to allow them to deal with protesters in these kind of environments where they will be in difficult to reach places at times. Of course, we know that some were actually gluing themselves to the building as well. You can see still some police officers here because there are still protesters outside the front of the palaces, the Palace of Westminster as well. They've been good enough to speak to us the last hour or so, so we'll see if they can speak to us again. Excuse me, you're live on GB News.
Hello, Mark.
Can you tell us your name?
Yeah, my name's Paul Stevens. I'm a retired police detective and I'm here with Extinction Rebellion because we cannot afford this anymore. Something has to be done and we need to give power back to the people with citizens' assemblies.
You're a retired police detective. Many of your former colleagues might be saying, you know, why on earth are you here? Look at all the officers around here that are tied up with trying to police you at a time when we've got such violence in London and beyond.
We're not responsible for the police response. Often there are too many officers deployed for Extinction Rebellion. And on the 10th of September, we're going to occupy Hyde Park with no disruption whatsoever. It's going to need a very, very low police profile for that.
Right, OK, well, that's Hyde Park. This is clearly Parliament, the mother of parliaments. You're here, 50 protesters. It's going to require a significant police response. You know that, given that you're a former Met detective yourself in the past. Clearly, in that response, for 2 hours, and actually still here, they're not policing the streets.
Well, there's, the police that are here are usually on standby for this kind of thing, so it's not as if we're taking huge numbers away. There's 2 vans here now, 2 carriers. It's not a big thing for the police to handle.
As we continue to speak to you, Paul, we're just going to get the Jim, our cameraman, just to get some other shots around here. As I say, nothing against you, but the shots are a bit more interesting than us. In terms of actually breaching Parliament itself, obviously some of your protester colleagues have gone inside, glued themselves to the Speaker's chair. Was that necessary?
They didn't glue themselves to the Speaker's chair. It's my understanding that they held hands and glued their hands to each other. So they're in a ring around the Speaker's chair, causing no damage to the Speaker's chair. That's my understanding.
One of your colleagues, we can show that shot, hopefully, Jim, just through the railings there, actually has put a banner up. It's now been taken down. It was on the scaffolding there. You'll probably be able to see the scaffolding at the other end. Clearly, there will be some questions to be asked as well about the security around here, in terms of how people were able to get up on scaffolding and to break off and get into the chamber. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's partly my job because I do protest liaison, so I make sure the police know that we're peaceful protesters, we're not terrorists, and that they get that message at the right time. So, you know, that's quite an important thing. But clearly, you know, it is a little bit of testing the security, and maybe there will be learning from this, and that's a positive thing.
Everyone here I know is passionate. You really are concerned about the planet and where we might be headed. But, you know, you said you're not terrorists. There will be many people who are actually watching this who think that that's exactly what you are, eco-terrorists, that you're causing such disruption and potential security threats here in very sensitive locations like Parliament.
The 2 candidates for the Tory party are saying nothing about the climate emergency. They're actually talking about authorising new oil and gas, which is going in the wrong direction.
But what about the cost of living emergency? People that
which
can't
is
afford...
linked to oil and gas. It's all part of the same thing.
Isn't it linked to the subsidies that they're paying as well for for their power supplies?
It's linked to the global suppliers of oil and gas that are keeping their prices high. We don't have any control over that. The government do. They can cap that. They can cap the oil suppliers, not the energy companies, but the oil suppliers. But they're not touching them. That's a political decision. So we need to put those decisions back in the hands of the public, give them proper information, not through the press, because they'll just get left or right, but proper information that's peer-reviewed, and let them make a decision. That's what this is about.
Well, here they're not getting left or right. They're getting it from you live. You can say what you want clearly, as long as you don't swear.
Yeah.
You're live on television. We're not censoring or cutting anything out from what you're saying. We know that colleagues of yours from Insulate Britain caused a lot of disruption earlier this year. Is that where we're headed now with Extinction Rebellion? Are you going to launch more of these protests in the weeks and months ahead?
Well, XR and Extinction Rebellion are not the same movement. They're separate, but there are some people who have moved from one to the other, I agree. But the kind of disruption we're looking at, and we're talking about the climate crisis is right here. We had a heat wave that caused over 1,000 excess deaths. That hasn't been put in the press. It crashed the IT system at Guy's Hospital, which put patients at risk for days. That hasn't gone out in the press. So these things have to be told. The public are facing these risks right now, and this government are not dealing with it. So we have to give the power back to the people to make decisions.
So the answer to my question is what? You're going to have many more of these direct action disruptive tactics that are going to cause people, unfortunately, I'm sure you would say, disruption.
Well, it depends on the press. If the press give us coverage without doing things like this, then we wouldn't have to do that, no. But that is not the case. So we have to do things like this to raise the profile and try and get people to come along to Hyde Park on the 10th, 11th and 12th of September. It's only in a week's time. It's purely education, arts, theatre, to learn about sustainable living and how you make decisions with citizens' assemblies, which will be a better form of democracy than we have behind us.
What would you say, though, to viewers and listeners on this channel and others who are watching and listening and who think that, you're just not living in the real world, the kind of, utopian society that you'd love to achieve is just not achievable in the real world?
It has to be achievable because otherwise we won't have a livable planet. The question is, how quickly are we going to do it? Are we going to delay the transition from fossil fuels because we want to make more money, or the 1% want to make more money, or are we going to do it as quickly and as safely as we can? And that's what we're pushing for, to do it as quickly as we can.
Okay,
and not cutting the oil taps off straight away. Nobody says that. It's about new oil and gas. It's going in the wrong direction.
Well, listen, many people might disagree with you. Lots of people will probably agree with you. But thank you very much for talking to us. Really appreciate that. You heard it there from protesters here that have been telling me that there will be more in the way of direct action. They believe that they're justified in doing that. But in doing that, of course, it does cause disruption. It does tie up police officers who at the moment would clearly rather be on the streets and one of the protesters saying if the media would cover us, they wouldn't need these protests. Well, let's see if that's true or not, but we're certainly covering them today, Patrick.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. Fantastic, stellar stuff there outside the House of Parliament for us. Mark White, our Home and Security. And to bring you the very latest on what is that breaking story, which is that Extinction Rebellion, at least were, I believe some of them still are, inside the House of Commons. They made a ring around the Speaker's chair and glued themselves to each other. There were banners outside the Palace of Westminster and, of course, protesters who were locked, chained to the railings before police moved them on. Now it's just protesters standing there. If you're just joining us, of course, shock horror, they're complaining about global warming, etc. What they're really calling for now is this citizens' assembly. I'll be doing a little bit of digging on exactly what that is. I've got the Extinction Rebellion website in front of me right here, right now, in case you're wondering what citizens' assembly is. It involves members of the public. Let's just see if you think this would work before we move on to something else, by the way. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Members of the public chosen at random based on the demographics of this country, so a variety of people from different ages, ethnicities, genders, etc., randomly chosen. They then are brought into an assembly and given advice by experts when it comes to the climate and quotes people affected by the climate Who exactly picks these people is not mentioned on the Extinction Rebellion website, as far as I can see. NGOs, non-governmental organisations, one would imagine that would include people like Greenpeace, etc., then give them more advice, and this is all overseen by, and I'm quoting now, independent people. So it does appear that potentially question marks there over whether or not that would be open to some form of tyranny or whether or not that is the most direct form of democracy. What do you make of all of that? More of this story as it rumbles on. It's not going away anytime soon. We'll cover the absolute lot of it for you right here. That is the Extinction Rebellion protests and indeed protesters making their way into the House of Commons. But moving away from that, the race for the leadership of the Conservative Party and by default, of course, the role of our next Prime Minister is finally drawing to a close. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is the front-runner and widely expected to defeat former Chancellor Rishi Sunak after weeks and weeks and weeks of hustings. The final one took place last night. The winner will be revealed on Monday, but who gets the keys to number 10? And, of course, they will obviously have a packed in-tray as well. Pressing challenges ahead. Is it a poison chalice? Is it a bad time to become Prime Minister? Joining me now is Royston Smith, Conservative MP for Southampton and Itchen. Great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. Just first things first, who have you thrown your weight behind? Is it Truss or Sunak?
I haven't done it. Oh. I've followed it for weeks and weeks and weeks. Yeah, you look surprised, but I bet I'm not alone. I followed it for weeks and weeks and weeks, and I didn't want this to happen in the first place. I didn't think it was the right time. And I think that from what I've seen, I don't see something that has emerged that is better than the Prime Minister that we already have. So I've chosen not to take part in it.
Yes, OK, well, that's understandable, although, of course, if you were Keir Starmer, I would now be accusing you of having splinters on your backside sitting on the fence, but that might be slightly unfair. But no, when it comes to one of the big issues of the day, which is not necessarily who's going to win this particular Tory leadership race, the odds-on favourite at the minute, of course, is Liz Truss, it's actually almost whether or not the country should have been in this position to begin with. Partygate did for Boris. Rumours are that his own wedding, he called it the greatest stitch-up since the Bayer Tapestry, which I actually quite like that turn of phrase. But Boris Johnson may well now be kind of exonerated potentially for, quotes, misleading Parliament. Do you actually think the majority of people would want Boris back?
I can't speak for the majority of people. Sadly, of course, lots of MPs do, and they speak as though they know. I can only speak about my constituents, and I'm prolific on the doorsteps of Southampton Itchen, and I always have been for the last 20-odd years. And I've spoken to hundreds and thousands of people. And there was no overwhelming desire to get rid of Boris in the first place. And people have said to me since, what have you all done? So I don't think that we can assume that this was something that the overwhelming majority of the public wanted. In fact, Boris Johnson himself said, 14 million people voted for me and I had an 80-seat majority. And currently, just like Margaret Thatcher, the people haven't chosen for him to go. So I don't know whether this is the right decision or not. I just think that in a time of great turmoil and trouble, changing the Prime Minister looks somewhat more than self-indulgent.
OK, let's just play the tape forward a little bit, if we can, Royston, and there'll be obviously a new leader, a new Prime Minister. How long do you think it'll be before the next general election? That could provide even more turmoil for us.
Yeah, I think the next general election is going to be a couple of years off anyway. I hope that we haven't got a new leader that says, I need a mandate now, I have to go and prove myself, because that doesn't end well either. We've got a term, we need to see it out, and we need to see it out because not only have we all been talking about ourselves for 2 months, if we go into a general election, we'll all be talking about ourselves for another 2 months. And in the meantime, too many of my constituents are struggling to heat their houses. Too many of them are worried about where this financial situation leads and whether they'll have a job in 6 or 12 months' time. So I want the new Prime Minister, who will have my 100% support, to get to work the day after he or she is elected and start trying to address these issues that have now been almost ignored for the last 2 months.
Yeah, I mean, yes, there are. I do want to get on to, by the way, shortly, what is our breaking news, which is the Extinction Rebellion protesters inside the House of Commons. I will be asking you about that shortly. Just one more on this before then, though, which is that some people would say the Conservatives have been in power for a very long time, and should we have had more pre-planning and not actually got into a situation where it's so extreme with people's cost of living crisis? Is it difficult now the Conservatives have been in power for so long to try to claim that they are not the ones in some way, shape or form responsible for this mess?
I think that's a legitimate criticism to make, but I don't think it's exclusively the government or this government or even the time we've been in power. This has been going on for a long time. It was Nick Clegg, wasn't it, that said it's a pointless waste of time going for nuclear. It won't come on stream until 2021 or 2022. So everyone has got responsibility for this. We don't get a lot of our fuel from Russia, but the invasion of Russia has made the world price go up, and we're all affected by that.
OK, all right. No, I do want to get you on now, what's going on in the House of Commons. Stay with us here at GB News, by the way, because we're going to be bringing you the latest as this story rumbles on. Extinction Rebellion inside the House of Commons. You are an MP. You sit in that very House. Our viewers on TV will be able to see those famous green benches now. Do you feel safe in the House of Commons? We had PC Keith Palmer, of course, who was slaughtered by a jihadi just outside it. One would have thought this is a remarkable turn of events now. I mean, if you were in there at the minute, potentially, I mean, it's a peaceful protest, don't get me wrong, but, again, play the tape forward. Your life could be put in danger. This must be very concerning for you, Royston.
Well, I'm not that concerned. What I am, though, is I'm really disappointed they've done this, because you remember when Tony Blair had some flour thrown over him and we had to put up glass screens and we had to increase security. Every time we do that, the people that own that building, the people who we go in that building to work in, to represent, it makes it more difficult for them to access their building. So far from talking about citizens' assemblies and democracy, what Extinction Rebellion have done today is made democracy even more difficult and made it even more out of reach to the people that we represent. So far from saying that they think it's time for the people to decide, they've taken just a little bit, again, away from the people, and I'm really disappointed they've done this.
Royston, thank you very much. That's Royston Smith, Conservative MP for Southampton and Itchen, who I actually thought made a really interesting point towards the end there, because Extinction Rebellion, XR, whatever, are now calling for a citizens' assembly. If it emerges that it's true that the way that some of them accessed the House of Commons there was by pretending to be on some kind of tour, does that stop people doing that in future? Does that make, in some way, shape or form, democracy less democratic in this country, less accessible? Anyway, we'll have to wait and see as details emerge. But as those details do emerge, we'll be bringing them to you live here on GB News Live. Mark Weiss, of course, on the scene, our Home and Security Editor. Plenty more still to come. Don't you dare go anywhere, because it will be kicking off even more after this very, very short break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Well, the race for the leadership of the Conservative Party is finally coming to a close. Of course, that individual will, by default, become our next Prime Minister. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is the front-runner and widely expected to defeat former Chancellor Rishi Sunak. And to get more on this now is political commentator Benedict Spence. Benedict, thank you very, very much for joining us. I think the size of relief at this particular issue being finally sorted is massive. But who on earth would actually want to become our Prime Minister? I mean, this is a poison chalice, isn't it?
Yes, I think you're probably right. I think whoever it is, and it is going to be Liz Truss at this stage, unless something unforeseen happens, probably has 2 years at best on the current trajectory, unless they're able to pull something pretty impressive out of the bag. It looks very likely, certainly from the latest polling, Labour is doing rather well, which was sort of unforeseeable 18 months ago under Boris Johnson, even in the depths of the pandemic mishaps. Actually, Boris Johnson was doing all right, but Liz Truss looks like she's going to go into number 10 with rather a large deficit to Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. That's not necessarily saying the Labour would win the next general election, but she's got an awful lot of work to claw back, and it's not helped by the fact that a lot of people, even in the Conservative Party themselves, are not particularly keen on Liz Truss. She was not, the most popular choice. She's not the most popular choice, actually, even amongst Conservative voters, members certainly, but voters in general seem much more inclined towards Rishi Sunak's economic policies and were, very keen on Kemi Badenoch over Liz Truss. And there's also the fact that, just more broadly, a lot of things aren't aligning for Liz Truss. A lot of her policy pledges about cutting taxes are not playing particularly well on global markets. I mean, today the pound is down 4% against the dollar, it was at one point, which I think is its biggest drop since the 80s, which is reassuring. And that's all with the knowledge that Liz Truss is going to be PM. The energy crisis is not going to go away. It's only going to get worse. Inflation is only going to get worse, exacerbated if what Liz Truss does is come in with a large series of tax cuts and cash injections for the lowest and poorest in society. I think a poison chalice is probably the correct way of saying it. And the odds of finding an antidote to the poison are very slim. Of course, we all hope that our Prime Minister, whoever they are, does well and is able to overcome the obstacles in their way. But you can't really see it at this moment in time.
I wonder if there's a wider point here, Benedict, as well, when it comes to our political class. Now, arguably more than since the 80s, as you allude to there, people are looking desperate for leadership. They're desperate for clear leadership, decision-making and, frankly, answers to a lot of the problems that they are facing in their lives right now. And at that specific moment in time, there was a change at the top of the Conservative Party, a change in Downing Street, no particular clear direction with any of the issues that you so rightly raised there. The potential for a straight choice between Liz Truss, who isn't particularly popular with members of her own party, the wider public, Keir Starmer, who I think is not really particularly in danger of giving us a huge manifesto. Real question marks when it comes to the British public about the quality of our political class as a whole, Benedict.
Yes, and that's nothing new. I mean, that's what Brexit was based on, was, unhappiness with the political system. I know it was couched very much about Europe because obviously that was the vote that it was on. But I do think it was very much sort of a protest vote against the general culture at Westminster. And I think you could probably say the same for Scottish independence, that thing that never seems to be going away. Ultimately, Liz Truss, she could do a lot worse than being incredibly bold, simply trying to force through a lot of things that a lot of other politicians have been too weak, too spineless to actually do. Now, be that sort of, energy policy, be that building nuclear reactors, be that fracking, be that the exploration of North Sea oil and gas again, that these are options that she could do, but she will face, as we've just alluded to, she'll face opposition from within her own MPs, and an 80-seat majority, which it isn't anymore, it's less than that now, isn't quite as large as you think, especially when you've got half the party arrayed against you. That was Boris Johnson's issue towards the end of his premiership. So I think what the country will be looking for is leadership. I don't think Liz Truss is that person. But hypothetically, let's say that she were to sort of, break the habit of a lifetime and sort of become this visionary new leader. Will the culture of Westminster, will the culture of British politics, will the British public even allow her to be that person? Or will we see the sort of the NIMBYism that has, characterized this country for so long take hold? People saying, oh, well, yes, we want sustainable energy, we want nuclear power, but we don't want it here. Yes, we want houses built, but we don't want them here. And we're going to fight you tooth and nail every step of the way. This is as much about the British public, actually. I think, obviously, that's not everybody, but a large sway of the British public, I think, live in something of a bit of a fantasy land. And I do think that this winter, with the cost of living going up as it is, I think he's going to bring it home to an awful lot of people. You cannot simply oppose all kinds of progress because it inconveniences the value of your house, your view, your child's catchment area at school, and hope that everything will be rosy. That's not the way the world works.
Benedict, thank you very much. As usual, Benedict Spence there, of course, political commentator and journalist. And the voting just closed at 5 p.m. for Conservative Party members to nominate their new leader, to elect their new leader and therefore, of course, the new Prime Minister. Will you be glad when it's all over? We've been asking you throughout the show. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Tweets coming in thick and fast as well. At GB News on Twitter. Do you wish you had Boris back? Will this go down as a great act of national self-harm? But from problems on this earth to things elsewhere as well as we go space. That's right, NASA will attempt to launch its next generation Artemis rocket to the moon for a second time tomorrow. I think I'd quite like to be on that, the way politics is going in this country at the moment. But will it actually take off? We'll have to wait and see. We've got a space expert on that. But first, of course, here's the latest headlines this year.
It's 2:33. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. An Extinction Rebellion protest is taking place at the House of Commons, with some supergluing themselves around the Speaker's chair. Up to 50 people are believed to be involved, draping banners from the Palace of Westminster and padlocking their necks to the railings outside. The group's calling for a citizens' assembly to combat what it describes as corruption in Parliament. Dame Cressida Dick says it's important politicians don't break rules. It's after a review found she felt intimidated into stepping down as Met Police Commissioner. An ultimatum was said to be behind her decision, issued to Dame Cressida by Sadiq Khan. The inquiry also found due process wasn't followed. Sadiq Khan says the review was clearly biased and ignores the facts. The Parliamentary inquiry into whether Boris Johnson misled MPs over Partygate is unfair and fundamentally flawed. That's according to a top barrister. Lord Pannick was tasked by the government to provide a legal opinion on the inquiry's investigation. In his report, he found the probe would be unlawful if taken to the courts. However, the chairman of the Parliamentary Standards Committee says the legal advice was misjudged. And the Queen will miss the Highland Games Braemar gathering in Scotland tomorrow. It's understood the decision's been taken for the comfort of Her Majesty, who's been suffering from mobility problems since last year. The Prince of Wales is still scheduled to attend. Voting in the Tory leadership contest closes at 5 p.m. today, with the results set to be announced on Monday. Either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak will take over from Boris Johnson as Prime Minister after a contest dominated by the cost of living crisis. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. It's back to Patrick with GB News Live in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, NASA will make a second attempt to launch their new Artemis moon rocket tomorrow. It comes after technical issues foiled the initial launch on Tuesday, leaving space enthusiasts bitterly disappointed. But what can we expect tomorrow? Will we finally see a successful launch? Joining me now is Andrew Lown, space expert and commentator. Great to have you on the show, Andrew. Right, OK, just talk to me a little bit about this. What can people expect? Because obviously last time, a crushing blow for space enthusiasts everywhere.
It was. What they can expect is much of the same, really. You'll have the same style of countdown going on. All the same procedures will take place, which everybody watched with great eagerness over a few hours, with the fueling of the rocket itself. With the you can see there on the image there, you can see the boiling off of liquid oxygen as they top up the tanks, and going through the same procedure again that everybody watched. Only hopefully this time it should work quite well. The problem which occurred last time was something they hoped to have tested on one of what's called the wet test, which is where you fuel the whole rocket up, and the only thing you don't do is launch it. That's just the one thing you don't do. And that was the hope that they could get the rocket tested this time. But the test they wanted to do was to check out whether or not they could actually cool all the engines. I use a model here to demonstrate, which is probably going to be easier. At the back end here, you have 4 engines, and you have to cool these down to stop the shock of the engines firing. So they have to be the same temperature. One of the engines, unfortunately, the cooling temperature didn't reach the correct level, and therefore you had to abort the launch. As it turned out, the only thing that was actually faulty was actually a temperature sensor after all that. So that's great, because that means it was a low category fix, something that could be sought. They either replaced the sensor or they recalibrated. And so therefore we should see the launch go ahead. And if that goes well, then we'll see the first launch of what's called the SLS system, which is the principal launch system for the Artemis mission. This is Artemis 1, where the capsule, Orion, uncrewed in this particular case, it has 3 dummies on board, which have got sensors on board to simulate passengers, to see what stresses are on them, what radiation levels they take. And this will actually orbit the moon for quite a period of time. It could be up to 42 days this mission could take. And it's also launching 3 satellites, 3 CubeSats, one of which is going to land on the surface, a Japanese rover. One is going to have a solar sail, which uses pressure of light to take it towards an asteroid. And another one will orbit the moon, taking measurements and looking for a possibility of water. And then the capsule will come back, and they'll test then the re-entry system on the capsule, ready for recovery. And it'll take about a year or so to evaluate everything, to make sure everything worked perfectly. And if it does, then we can see in 2024 the first human launch to the moon since the Apollo days, where crew members will be taken on an orbit about the moon, very similar to the Apollo 8 mission that took place in 1968. And then hopefully a year later, the first lunar landing in 50-odd years.
This is it. So, Andrew, it's a perfect point for me to interject here. Firstly, you said that on this particular journey, there's going to be 3 dummies. They could put me in there and then there'd be 4. But have we actually really made a massive progression? Because you just said there we're going to be doing something, we're testing to see if we can do something that we did decades ago. I mean, space... No, I'm wrong. He's back involved. What's going on? Come on.
Yeah, we did it before with the Saturn V. This is the first time the SLS system has been launched. So you have to test the whole system of the SLS to make sure it works. It's a different piece of engineering entirely. The technology is very different for starters, which is being used. So yes, and it's a brand new capsule. The capsule is very different from the Apollo capsule, very different indeed. And so therefore you do have to try these things out rather than risking killing the astronauts on the mission. So that's why you do an all-up engineering test to make sure everything works, to actually really safeguard the astronauts themselves. And that's why you actually do a test like this. So that's why this is a test mission. Otherwise, we are, from a physics point of view, doing something very similar, but from an engineering point of view, much of it is very different and very new.
OK, well, there we go. Andrew, thank you very, very much. And can I just commend you on bringing your own props as well? You had a model rocket. Yeah, I can sense it coming back. It's coming back. There we go. If everyone watching on TV, Andrew's got his rocket out. Did you make that yourself?
No, I have a guy who 3D prints models for me, because I stage little exhibitions as well, and he 3D prints the rockets for me so I can actually use them and demonstrate them.
Thank you very much. I tell you what, that's top drawer stuff. That very rarely do we get guests who come on with their own props. So thank you very much, Andrew Lander, space expert and commentator. I don't know about you, it's definitely on my bucket list to go to the moon. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to settle for not ever achieving that, really. But lots of you are emailing in today with your thoughts on what's been our big story of the day. OK, it's been our big breaking news today. You make sure you stay tuned and locked into GB News here, because we're going to be giving you the updates as and when they come through. But that is that Extinction Rebellion have been gluing themselves to the Speaker's chair, or around the Speaker's chair as well, like a really bad game of Ring a Roses in the House of Commons. Now, loads of issues here. OK, how do they get in? For a start, we believe some of them may have got in on some kind of public tour. What do they actually want? Well, not the end of the world when it comes to environmental disaster and a citizens' assembly. I'll talk to you more about that. But Ian has beaten me to the jump on this. He says, Ian, a citizens' assembly? Really? Given how much unnecessary inconvenience they have caused us all, what makes them think a citizens' assembly will agree with their mad ideas? The problem is that these people make any sensible discussion on climate change impossible. Just to whiz you through this, I think it's worth noting, I've been doing a bit of research here on what Extinction Rebellion's version of a citizens' assembly means, right? It's a bit of context. So, members of the public chosen at random due to their ethnicity and, well, in keeping with the demographics of the country, right? So age, ethnicity, gender, etc., right? They will be then given advice by chosen experts. Who chooses the experts? One would imagine it would be Extinction Rebellion, probably, and people affected by climate. So you're going to get no one who says that they don't believe that, climate change is, well, not all right, but certainly not the impending end of the world. NGOs, non-governmental organisations, will be getting involved as well. This will be seen, so we can all sleep easy at night, ladies and gents, by independent people, which to me screams certainly the potential, anyway, for this to be open to tyranny. Who chooses all of these people? Who are the experts? What advice are these people being given, and who are they being overseen by? To me, I mean, colour me shocked, but it doesn't really seem to be the most democratic way of conducting business. But there we go. Philip says, I can't believe that the police are just standing around when they should be properly policing these streets. This is everything that's wrong with modern Britain and policing. Couple of points on that, Philip. I'm inclined to agree with you. For me, the wider point was not that the police were necessarily standing there and just letting this go by. They did actually remove, as Mark White, our reporter, who is at the scene, and we will be going through him throughout the show, did show us those people were moved along relatively quickly, at least the ones outside the House of Commons, by the police officers. The bigger point for me is how on earth these people were able to do it, because it's OK, it's all very well and good that Parliament has not, been reinstated yet after the summer recess. However, this is a massive concern. If you can scale Parliament, you can get in to the House of Commons and you can essentially glue yourself to things in there as well and chain yourself up outside. It's not so long ago a police officer was stabbed to death by a jihadi outside the House of Commons. For me, that's a massive, massive concern. And yes, he says he can't believe that the police were just standing around there. John as well says Extinction Rebellion are doing nothing to make the average person's life better. I'm inclined to agree with you as well. Keep these views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We love to hear from you. But moving on from all of this now, later this month, Belfast is running Restaurant Week in order to try and attract more business. Doogie BT has caught up with some restaurants to ask for an honest assessment of the current situation and their views on the future.
Dean's Restaurant has been part of Belfast's elite cuisine from before the Good Friday Agreement and has weathered all sorts of storms. And owner Michael Dean thinks this may well be the perfect financial one.
Well, at the moment we are trying to hold our own. We're trying to work on a reasonable margin, but we were trying to work on that margin before we got the massive VAT hit again at the end of COVID. So now, at the end of it, when for every £1 million we turn over, 250,000 goes to government, and that's nothing to do with the profit. That's just on the turnover, so that's difficult. The main thing that worries me about the price increase, we can handle bits and pieces. We've seen the beef go up 50%, the fish, the cooking oil, everything. But if the business becomes an occasion for people to go out once every month or once every 2 months or once every 6 months around their birthday, then we get a real problem.
Like many cities across the UK, working from home is costing business and putting jobs at risk. It's hard to believe this is Belfast during a lunch hour. The footfall is substantially down due to those that continue the working practices that began during the pandemic. Barry Rylands is the manager of the first brew pub to open in Northern Ireland and believes more needs to be done to make the city more attractive.
Not enough people working in the city centre, not enough draw of a city centre to bring people in. There's a lot of derelict buildings around this part of town at the minute that need to be looked at for a long time now. The office workers aren't coming back in the numbers that we thought they would, and there's maybe not enough shops or decent shops to attract people in the city centre either.
Jaron O'Neill owns a wine bar and has footfall, but sees pricing as an issue.
I mean, our gas and electric's nearly up 200% from last year, which is just outrageous. My head chef's fantastic at sitting down weekly with myself and just gauging the price increases, because at the moment it's just madness. You're talking chips could go up 20% in a day.
Those that have saw the worst of times believe COVID and all that went with it may yet see more financial casualties.
I think it's been a knock-on effect of all of this, and I think we've been suffocated by all sorts of nonsense. And now the reality, when we're looking at it in the face, there's a lot of places will not make Christmas with the cost of living, with the electric, with the gas, and the heavy VAT coming in at the back of it. There's a lot of places will not see January.
Doogie Beattie, GB News.
Yeah, thank you for that, Doogie. Right, OK, we're moving on now. Not long left with this particular show, but GB News has been told that Albanian crime gangs are becoming increasingly prominent in the drugs trade in many areas of England. Now, in Suffolk, for example, the Police and Crime Commissioner says that he's very concerned about the problem in his county and how the trade is fueling much of the violence on the streets. You can't keep him off the telly. Mark White's been a busy man today. Our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, has gained exclusive access to one of Suffolk's elite units involved in trying to stop organised criminals from using the country's roads to transport drugs. Let's see what he had to say.
If you boys could go towards Freshfields, me and Sophie will get on the bridge.
These officers are racing to intercept a vehicle believed to be involved in organised crime.
Yeah, just in case they come in the other way and we miss him, then you boys can get him before he actually gets into Freshfields.
We're on board with Sergeant Ed Wright and his team from Operation Sentinel, Suffolk Constabulary's dedicated unit trying to disrupt the criminal gangs using the county's roads for their trade in drugs.
Vehicle moves into lane 1. We've got 2 vehicles for cover.
They've caught up with the vehicle on the A14 near Newmarket and are waiting for other police units to catch up so they can stop it.
Vehicle is off at Tuddenham. Yeah, vehicle's failing to stop.
But just seconds later, the suspect pulls over.
It did make a sudden increase in speed, but it is now stopped and looks like it is complying. Just be very aware. Keys out of the ignition. Keys out of the ignition. Great. Have you got a driving licence for me, please, mate? You're disqualified.
The man has told the officers he's Albanian, one of many from the Western Balkans these officers are encountering as they disrupt organised criminal gangs.
We're going to be searching you and your vehicle, yeah, but the fact that you're a disqualified driver as well fits with the MO of OCG groups in this vehicle, all right? And is there anything that you have either on you or the vehicle that's going to harm us, or anything that you shouldn't have?
Oh, I got a Stanley knife and the knife for...
Just a Stanley knife.
Having stopped the vehicle, the driver is now detained and the Sentinel teams are beginning a search of the car. They're expert at this, they know what they're looking for. And what they're looking for is anything that's potentially connected to the drugs trade. It doesn't take them long to find it.
Basically, all the equipment you'd need to set up your own little grow, in effect, for a cannabis
sort of factory. So you've got flexible tanks, you've got obviously the early stages, growing the seeds, fans for the circulation.
Is this what you're seeing time and again increasingly now, like other forces, that the Albanian organised criminal gangs are moving into these areas?
No, they are. They certainly seem to be on the up. They seem the dominant ones at the moment.
This is a highly impressive unit. In the past year, these officers have recovered drugs to the value of almost £1 million and arrested more than 500 suspects. The posters in the office provide a graphic illustration of the growing involvement of Albanian criminal gangs in the drugs trade. Of the 9 recent convictions, 7 are Albanian.
I'm very concerned about it. I want to make it quite clear, I'm not saying that all Albanian people are bad, because clearly they're not. But the reality is there is a disproportionate level of Albanian criminal gangs operating in East Anglia and in Suffolk.
With the Albanian suspect in custody, they're checking properties in the area he's known to have visited, looking for any signs of a cannabis farm. Then suddenly they find what they're looking for. In an upstairs flat, rooms full of cannabis plants, 150 in total. They would eventually have yielded £150,000 in street-level sales. It's big business. The drugs trade fuels so much of the violent crime plaguing towns and cities across the country.
A lot of crimes can be tracked ultimately to drugs. So people commit burglaries and robberies often to fund a drug habit, shoplifting to fund a drug habit, breaking into cars to fund a drug habit. With that becomes violence when people can't get the drugs that they're addicted to.
Back in Newmarket, as their patrols continued, the teams have stopped another suspicious vehicle. The men inside are from the Balkans, this time Bulgaria. One has been arrested in the past for drugs offences.
You're a disqualified driver in this country. You can't drive in this country.
Without insurance as well, it's one vehicle that won't be taking to the roads again anytime soon, as it's now been seized. But for the teams of Operation Sentinel, there are many other vehicles, many organised criminal gangs continuing to use the roads to ship their drugs and fuel misery and violence. Mark White, GB News, Suffolk.
Yes, informative stuff that, of course, a very, very serious element to it, a deadly serious element of it as well, with things like the drug trade, etc., fueling violent crime. I must say, I am deeply concerned one day that I'll get done for speeding, the police will pull me over and Mark White will get out the back of their car and stick a camera through my window, but there we go. Lots of you have been emailing in today with your thoughts on the Tory leadership contest as it draws, finally, to a close. Dam's been on. It is wrong to say Conservative voters prefer Sunak to Liz. I think Sunak is an insincere socialist like Blair. Liz all the way for me. Well, making his views very, very clear there. Thank you very much, Dan. We've not got long left. Just time to rattle through a couple of these. Daryl's been on. Liz Truss may see herself as the new Margaret Thatcher, but in no way can she fill that woman's shoes. She just doesn't have the same presence, command, personality and strength of will. I think she is weak and wooden. Well, thank you very much to everybody who's been getting in touch and giving us your views throughout the show. We are, of course, the People's Channel. Thank you very much for all of that. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Of course, loads of you getting in touch as well at GB News on Twitter. That's all from me for now. Up next is The Briefing with Arlene Foster. However, can I give you a very cheeky little plug for a special episode of the one and only Friday Night Feast, 7 till 9 p.m. A little bit of light relief to drug you kicking and screaming into the weekend. I'll be back on that 7 till 9 p.m. Don't you dare miss it. See you then.
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. This weekend, there's plenty going on. Broadly speaking, it's sunshine and showers, but some places getting a real downpour or two. There'll be some gusty winds as well, but it's still going to feel warm when the sun is out. What's going on? Well, two areas of low pressure are kind of merging together to form one big area of low pressure that will dominate our weather well into next week. Already bringing some very heavy showers for southwest England, Northern Ireland, and we'll see more of those this evening over parts of Wales and western Scotland. Further east, many places will be dry with clear spells. The winds picking up across the far northeast. A much warmer night across Scotland compared to recent nights, and again, like the last few nights further south, temperatures staying in the mid-teens. So quite a humid feel to Saturday. There'll be some sunshine, but there'll also be some heavy rain. And particularly parts of south of Scotland, Northern Ireland, that rain may last all day. It could cause some issues, some disruption, certainly some difficult conditions on the road. So we do have a Met Office yellow warning in place. The showers further east will be more scattered, so not everywhere seeing them, but where they do occur, they could be heavy and thundery. Some warmth to the sun still, so when it's out, we'll see temperatures again in the mid-20s, so feeling quite warm and humid. But more rain then coming into western areas during the day and through the evening. Further heavy showers across Scotland and northern England, and then look at this, more rain sweeping in as we go through the early hours of Sunday morning. Low pressure dominating. That band of showery, heavy rain works its way from southwest to northeast during Sunday. Again, not huge amounts getting to eastern parts of England, where of course it has been very dry. And Northern Ireland, Wales should brighten up as we go through Sunday. Certainly a drier day for Northern Ireland. Temperatures high teens, low 20s, and again probably still feeling quite warm and humid when the sun does pop out. More downpours to come in the outlook to next week. Low pressure remains in charge. Further heavy showers likely across all parts Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight.